written an article, I believe, on an Indian saint that discusses this point, where often the master may not know the disciple's experience. Could you?
Yeah, key point. Faqir Chand. It's 1978. He's 92 years old. First time I've ever met the man. Interesting gentleman. Meditated something like 70 years, supposedly 10 to 12 hours a day on Shabd Yoga. Used to have daily out-of-body experiences, higher states of consciousness. Watch what happens. He starts to initiate disciples into the path of Sadhana. They say, Baba Faqir Chand, you appear to us in our meditations. You've saved me. One woman talks about it. She's dying in a river in the Ganges, and she prays to Baba Faqir Chand. Faqir Chand appears and saves her from the river. I meet Faqir Chand in 78, and he looks at me in his voice while I'm doing an impersonation of Faqir Chand. But David, I know nothing about this. And the point is that here's a guy of a very high stature. He says, I know absolutely nothing about appearing to people in meditation, appearing to them in these miraculous incidences at a river or somebody's dying. He goes, I know nothing about it. And his point was, it's a projection of their own mind. Now, maybe a higher mind, maybe a purer mind, but it's their own mind. Faqir Chand said, I have nothing to do with it.
So why do masters initiate disciples when the disciples believe that they are a master or a perfect saint or a perfect living master, and yet they do not seem to do anything to
I understand.
Negate people's perception that they are the master?
Well,
even though they might say, well, it's my master so-and-so that deserves the credit, not me. But yet, people come to them in satsangs, and yet...
Hey, look, this is my bottom line. I may be wrong. My bottom line is that the only guru that's worth following is, number one, the guy that doesn't claim to be one. Second, he doesn't want to be a guru. And third, he says God is the real guru, not me. Anybody that allows himself to be bodily worshipped as if he's the sole entity, the sole transmitter of God consciousness, I wouldn't follow him. Because we're all human beings. We all don't know that much. So why should we ascribe, just because some guy wears a turban, he's got the third eye patch, he looks heavy, and we bow down to him, why should we buy that? We shouldn't. And so a genuine guru, by my definition, I may be biased, I may be prejudiced, is the one who doesn't claim to be one. And it actually tells you, if you want to find God, find him within yourself.
In fact, recently you were quoted in the San Francisco Chronicle, August 3rd, I believe, 1988, and in your article on the JR controversy, you list some of the sevenfold steps in evaluating a spiritual teacher.
Right. And by the way, if we're going to use John-Roger as our test case, he does not pass that test. Number one question, does the guru charge money? John-Roger does. Number two, does the spiritual teacher have an ethical lifestyle?
Well, he claims that he has a vow of poverty.
Does he? Of course not. You know how much he lives. In Mandeville Canyon, when I went to his house, he owns something like 9 or 10 different cars. He has a beautiful house. Nothing against him having a beautiful house. Nothing against him having cars. But don't claim to be taking a vow of poverty. Just say you're a rich cult leader in Los Angeles, and nobody's going to get on your case. Your second question, if I can go connect to that, is that you were talking about what disciples should do once they find out a particular guru is fraudulent or not genuine. What do you do if you're stuck in that situation? Well, I think the only thing we can do is confess ignorance. Confess we don't know much. And better, instead of making demigods out of human beings, it's better to say, hey, we don't know much. And we'll check things out. Instead of trying to believe that this guy is God when he's not. And therefore, if you question, like one guru said, who I consider to be genuine in India, he says, if you question your whole life, criticize your whole life, that is to find out what the nugget of truth is, you'll be building on a foundation of rock. That's it. And I agree with that. I think that's true.
Some of the other criteria?
So the other criterions, besides having a pure ethical life, that is, who appointed you as a guru? Who appointed you as a master? Are you legitimately appointed? Did the previous master appoint you in a designated public fashion? Fourth, are the teachings pre-rational or trans-rational? What I mean by that, trans-rational says you can criticize the teacher. You can rip, shred, and lacerate him, and he doesn't get offended. That is, you can stand in front of him, in front of 500, 600 people and say, hey, I think you're wrong, and the guru doesn't shrink back. He accepts that kind of criticism. And then another fifth and sixth thing, what are the daily results of your interaction with this guru? Are you happy? Are you kinder? Are you more willing to face the terminal apex of your life, that is death. Those kinds of questions.
Speaking of criticism, what was John-Roger's criticisms of your article, if any?
Oh, that's a good point. Now, what happened was, when the article came out in about June, what John-Roger did is he set up a phony P.O. box in West Los Angeles on Wilshire Boulevard. And I think I've taken Aaron there, and I know I've taken Jeff Cooper and my wife there. And what he did is he set up a phony P.O. box, called it the Coalition for Civil and Spiritual Freedom. So I started to get these letters from a Dr. Peter Davidson, Ph.D.
When you say phony, it was a real P.O. box.
Oh, yeah, good point. It's a real P.O. box. I say phony in the sense that when I went there with Jeff Cooper and my wife and some other people, we found out that the P.O. box was actually signed and paid for by John-Roger Hinkins. John-Roger claims never to have heard of Peter Davidson or Skip Ferguson or these other names that he used as pseudonyms. And yet he's the guy who paid for this mailbox. So John-Roger started sending out these smear letters. He would never say anything himself. And in these letters, they were basically criticizing all the information I had. The biggest criticism of all, and the one that I think almost might be justified, is I did not put the names of my informants. And there's only one reason I didn't do that. Their lives were in danger. And I was the only guy at the time in 1983, at least in 1984, who was willing to take a stand. They were scared for their lives, and I said, pardon my language, screw it. Somebody's got to make a stand. Maybe I'm wrong, but somebody's got to make a stand. And these informants who were intimidated and scared did not make that stand. But I'm happy to say in 1988, they did make a stand. Los Angeles Times, People Magazine, you can check out the Chronicle, the Sun Chronicle, Cult Awareness News. All of this is now public.
Right. So you verified that John-Roger had a P.O. box, and from this P.O. box, letters were being sent to whom? To various people?
To Sue Whitmore, to Wendell Whitmore, to Wes Whitmore, to Jack Canfield, and to me. And in those letters, they were saying the weirdest kinds of things. I mean, not even actors, the funny stuff. Besides me being a gay FBI agent, besides me having some like homosexual lovers in San Diego, or besides me being having 7 or 8 researchers working for me as if I had all this money. And all of it was just really meant for one reason. I don't mind being ripped or shredded. I mean, he has the full right to criticize Dave Lang. But just be honest. Just be clean about it. All of this stuff was made up. Why was it made up? Well, he wanted his informants, the informants at least talking to me, to retract their story. And he also wanted his informants to go back against me so that whatever I said in that article would be refuted. The problem was, it was all true. And he knew it. Then the upshot of the whole thing, the big thing came, was 1984, it's October 5th. That's when I got robbed.
Before we get into the robbery, would you mind going over a few of the letters and discussing a few of the highlights? I think it's in the other folder.
That's a good point.
Like Peter Davidson letter.
Let me see. Yeah, I mean, here we got a number of letters. Like, you look at letters like this. Here's a letter that was sent to me in Del Mar. It's by a woman named Martha Jung. And it's a bad copy of this particular letter. If you look at the date, it's February 5th, 1984. This is before I had written the article on John-Roger. And if you look at this letter, and you're not going to see it very good on this video, but the information is really funny. Because in this letter, this person claims to be very close to John-Roger and claims that John-Roger was married and had an illegitimate child. Why would somebody send me a letter like this? For one reason. So that I, naively enough, would quote the letter in the text, which is absolutely false, has no substantiation to it, so that when it did come out, the JR controversy, John-Roger could then sue me, and rightly so. Naturally, I did not quote the letter. Interestingly enough, it looks like it appears to have been written on John-Roger's typewriter. We'll get into that details a little later. A number of other letters were also...
Peter Davidson?
Yeah, we'll get into Peter Davidson in a second because I think the
Didn't
other...
you invite him for lunch or...
Oh, yes. I asked Peter Davidson, who, supposedly owns this Coalition for Civil and Spiritual Freedom, who really is John-Roger, to meet for lunch. He wouldn't do it. And in fact, when I called him on his existence, that if he's a real person, he said he moved to New York and couldn't give me his forwarding address because his life was in danger. It's a total crock.
Now, there were some other letters that were sent to India. Sure. Or that letter might have been after the robbery.
Yeah. Well, no, actually, good point. Very good point. There was a letter.
Oh, from fictitious.
Peter Davidson, exactly. Now watch what happens.